Monsters, ghosts, ghouls, and everything that goes bump in the night are here to terrify children. They are used in stories to scare them, to make them do the morally correct thing. These become fables and other tales with moral founding. In the Victorian age of literature, monsters became physically the things the public was scared of. By creating a monster, you gave a physical entity for a metaphysical fear. So where along the line did this change, and why? Because we went from this
He did the monster mash.
to this. Today we're going to be talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula and how it showcases gender and the nature of the fear of sexuality. In 1897, Bram Stoker published Dracula, which as a novel is comprised as a series of letters, all from a group of people who got involved with Count Dracula. For context, we first follow Jonathan, who is a solicitor, which is like a lawyer, and he goes to Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania. The purpose of this visit is to help Dracula purchase a home in London. And no, this isn't a plot from Hotel Transylvania. Drac's got some fat stacks, and John is going to help him spend it. Dracula also has ulterior motives, but John doesn't know this yet. But now let's get into the characters I'm most interested in. Jonathan the lawyer, Mina his fiancée now wife, Count Dracula, and Lucy, who's Mina's best friend, as I feel they represent the pillars of discussion about gender identity and sexuality. The relationship between Jonathan and Mina challenges the traditional male and female dynamic. Dracula as a character himself has underlying gay characterization and interactions with other characters, and Lucy as a character is shown to portray the dangers of sexual promiscuity. Jonathan. As a man, he shows a good majority of characteristics of the English gentleman. He's educated because he's a lawyer. He's deeply in love with his fiancée. He respects her. He's polite. But he does also try to rationalize everything the best he can. On the other hand, he also shows a more feminine side, and we can also infer this later from his fiancée Mina, which I will discuss her later. The most pertinent scene being one of Jonathan, sitting alone in a room Dracula has previously told him was off limits. He observes the Transylvanian countryside in a room lit by moonlight, sat on an old oak table. Peering out of the window of the rocky expanse directly below him, he ponders about the past of this castle. He felt that, a long time ago, a fair lady would sit exactly where he was and write to their lovers in a diary. And he felt those same feelings sitting in that spot. These feelings which are traditionally very feminine. By calling his, a fiancé a lover, writing in a quote-unquote diary, and pondering about how a fair lady might have felt in a very romantic setting. Alone, trapped in a castle with a monster keeping you prisoner, as a rocky cliff face is all that awaits you. John makes himself out to be a damsel in distress, and then further becomes one as the scene plays out. By John falling asleep by the window, and is awoken by three very, quote, voluptuous, quote, female vampires, who through their lustful appearance alone overpower him without a fight. John describes himself as helpless against their pure sexual presence, and is only saved by Dracula before one of the female vampires bites him on the neck. Dracula also particularly notes that they can kiss him once Dracula is through with Jonathan, showing jealousy, protectiveness, and a particular wanting of Jonathan himself. Then throughout the rest of the story, Jonathan sits on the sidelines, while the rest of the more masculine men hunt and kill Dracula. While it's true Jonathan is sick after this incident, he's also very frail after this incident. And these are both very traditional, almost required feminine traits of being weak and needing protection by another. It's not that Stoker is playing with Jonathan's sexuality, as he's helpless to female seduction, but how John expresses himself as a man. Jonathan isn't transgender, but himself is a commentary, like Mina, about how there can be different types of men and women. Mina. When talking about different women and the way those roles are played out in a marriage, the most clear-cut example is that of Mina. She's described in the novel as having a man brain, which is one that is rational, isn't afraid, and someone of high intellect. Mina shows all of these qualities and is even acknowledged by the other characters as having these.
Upon pondering my orb for many a millennia, that wonderful Madam Mina. She's a man's brain, a brain that a man should have were he much gifted, and a woman's heart. The good God fashioned her for a purpose. Believe me, when he made that so good combination, friend John, up to now, fortune has made that woman of help to us. After tonight, she must not have to do with this so terrible affair. It is not good that she run a risk so great. We men are determined, nay, are we not privileged, to destroy this monster, but it is no part for a woman.
On top of that, she's also shown to be aware of Lucy's beauty. But in my opinion, it's not in a lustful way, more like a guy and girl best friend way, as Mina is able to sleep in the same bed as Lucy, but not find herself uncontrollable around her. The question now is, if Mina is characterized as having masculine qualities, what effect does this have on her relationship with John? If both are quote-unquote traditionally masculine in their marriage, how does it affect the overall power dynamic? Stoker here is commenting on the fact that there are more than one type of couple that it can exist, and although the male is typically shown to need to be commanding and take charge, we can see the opposite, as Dracula pushes around John while he's in the castle with ease. But Mina, although being sidelined by the other characters due to her being a woman because of the time, she's shown to be put herself on the team while John doesn't. And contrasting that with our now present day media, we see this more and more as we see more, tomboy masculine women and more exuberant or flamboyant sheepish males get shown as dynamic. And Stoker here has a first prototype of this. Talking about Dracula, it's no shocker that I can make the claim that Dracula has gay overtones in characterization. I also base this finding on Matteo Lane when talking about castles and heterosexuality.
Also, by the way, all castles are gay. No, am I wrong? Castles are gay. No straight guys like, I want a tower. That is a gay thing.
So there, we can all go home now because it's been a historic model in the past to make your villain gay because being gay was a bad thing. And by making your villain gay, you made them morally corrupt, thus making them evil. But I say,
Gay rights! Yeah, gay rights! I'm gay.
Nonetheless, let's talk about Dracula more as a vampire, and how vampires innately are promiscuous. The main form of them sucking blood out of somebody is through biting, and specifically biting the neck. Not only is this biologically intimate, as it's a place that most mammals want to protect, it's a show of trust to allow that to be open to another. And now let's talk about the usage of blood. In this story, it dramatically increases intimacy as when Lucy is having to undergo blood transfusions from all the different men in the story. Her fiancé says that this is like they are already married after sharing blood, before Lucy passes away shortly afterwards. Sharing blood nowadays is a common practice, and blood drives are as common as McDonald's. But this was a revolutionary medical technology in the past, and the act of sharing your life force, some might say, and the thing flowing inside you, it leads to an act of intimacy unseen beforehand. While Dracula himself isn't portrayed as being overly lustful upon appearance, the female vampires that attack John are, and they are the only other vampires we come into contact with. The scene itself makes note of their physical appearance, especially in the manner that is overtly sexual. It isn't their personality that John finds attractive, but the corset bound tightly around their waist. It conveys that being sexual means being a monster, and it's only due to their lustful appearance that he was entranced by them, making him utterly powerless. Lucy. As a character, there isn't much depth to her. She's the classic, idealized, fair lady. She's beautiful, she knows her place, she's kind-hearted, but she's not too intelligent. But what happens to her from her actions is the most important aspect to her. Early on in the story, she's proposed to by 3 men. She wishes she could marry all 3. Now it seems that this is more of an offhand comment, but Lucy dies first in the story. She's the first to die by the hands of Dracula, and based on the perception of promiscuity in the Victorian age, Lucy gets punished because of it. Here we see the foundations of the virgin dies last trope, or those who sin and have coitus before marriage get hunted down by the villain. But it's based around cultural ideas instead of a thematic plot element. And now let's contrast this with present time. At this point in time, there have been video games and movies based entirely around this idea. But based on the usage in media, the origin for these two tropes don't come from the same place. In 2011, Cabin in the Woods came out, and this movie utilizes tropes as pieces of comedy. A group of teenagers alone in the woods get killed off by some otherworldly evil entity. There's a stoner, a jock, cheerleader, and the ones who have sex first die, and the rest is history. The last trope that is the linchpin of the movie is the virgin dying last. It's the only hope to stop the end of the world. But this trope isn't based on cultural norms, but on the norms of the horror genre itself. So today, what has happened, what has changed over the past 126 years? Well, let's look at some monsters. We have a woman in love with a zombie, a woman in love with a 200-year-old Christian virgin. We have Adam Sandler voicing Dracula. And finally, we have a Guillermo del Toro movie about a woman in love with a fish. Why and when and where does this change happen? Well, it's impossible to say that things haven't changed culturally throughout the West and the greater regions of the world. From fearing the monster to secretly lusting for them to now movies and stories getting told about loving the monster. So, what do monsters represent now? Dracula in the 1890s created fear of disease, sexual promiscuity, and foreigners. But what does Adam Sandler represent when he voices Dracula, who takes a cruise? Monsters have lost the aspect of fear in favor of celebrating difference. The different types of people in our life who feel like monsters, those who have birth defects, people with extreme mental illness, and all those who feel outcast in society. Monsters are used to convey that you can still be loved and be an outcast, that even if you are a monster, you are still worthy of others' attentions. Monsters aren't scary anymore, at least not any scarier than taxes.